We took B-movie way too seriously, and it wasn't a mistake. In the early 2000s, Jerry Seinfeld was a comedy god when he imagined an unusual animated film, A Bee Sues Humanity for Exploiting Honey. Surprisingly, wins and triggers a global ecological collapse, so the final solution is for the bees to go back to work. All of this while the protagonist maintains a close relationship with a human woman. This wasn't just another project. It was produced by DreamWorks Animation, Steven Spielberg's company. How could such a strange movie, backed by such powerful names, emerge from Hollywood? It all started with a crazy idea during a dinner, a blockbuster, and two mega-successful producers who couldn't say no to anything. What followed were changes on the fly, animators on the verge of breakdown, and as if that weren't enough, lawsuits, plagiarism, and even a public apology. If you like the movie, I recommend putting this video on your TV and getting comfortable. Today we're going to discover what happens when the most powerful comedian in the world decides to make a $150 million animated film and has absolute control over every single scene. Many movies start in business meetings or in the creator's studios, but B-Movie was born over dinner, more specifically during a dinner between entertainment icons in East Hampton, New York. On one side of the table was the star of the movie and of this story, Jerry Seinfeld. In the 90s, he went from doing stand-up to leading the sitcom Seinfeld. Its witty dialogue and sarcastic humor turned it into a massive phenomenon that lasted 9 seasons and catapulted its creator to stardom. On the other side of the table was Steven Spielberg, who needs no introduction. The day before, Seinfeld had asked him to direct an American Express commercial. The director couldn't commit, but he was a fan of Seinfeld's and suggested they have a quiet dinner. Between bites, they talked endlessly about the industry, family, and life until they ran out of things to say. Seinfeld thought about how to break the silence with something clever and said the first thing that came to mind. The night before, he had been sitting with a couple of friends and remarked, "What if someone made a movie called B-Movie, and it was about bees?" He thought the joke at least had a cinematic connection, a pun on bee and B-movies. He figured Spielberg would laugh at the quip, but instead, Spielberg looked at him seriously and said, "We're going to make that movie." Seinfeld was baffled. The filmmaker told him it would be perfect for a DreamWorks Animation production, a division of DreamWorks, the company he had co-founded. Seinfeld didn't know what to say. He had never been part of an animated film. In fact, he had never worked in cinema at all. Spielberg emphasized that the idea was brilliant and added a key detail. The movie would bear his signature style, just like the sitcom. Those words hit home for Seinfeld. Steven Spielberg was proposing they make a movie together and promising him the opportunity to leave his mark on it. He asked if they could truly make an animated film where he could have creative freedom, even control. He thought Spielberg might change his mind, but he said yes. Seinfeld agreed to make B-Movie, unaware that an experience filled with tension and problems was looming on the horizon. A few days after that dinner, Seinfeld was summoned to the DreamWorks offices in Glendale, Los Angeles. Spielberg was waiting for him there, and they were soon joined by Jeffrey Katzenberg. We've talked about him in several videos, but it's worth remembering that, thanks to him, we have classics like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, The Little Mermaid, and Shrek. Besides being the head of DreamWorks Animation, he was a huge fan of the comedian and had always wanted him for a project. Seinfeld was still excited about the idea, but he figured Spielberg had thought better of it. How are they going to give freedom, let alone control, to someone with zero film experience? He thought that at best, they would buy his idea and offer him a voice role for some minor character. But Spielberg and Katzenberg were determined to make B-Movie a reality, and they offered him the chance to star in, write, and produce it. He would have a massive team working under him, but the true author would be Jerry Seinfeld. The comedian was speechless, but just in case they changed their minds, he nodded. It was a golden opportunity to do something big and ambitious, alongside two titans of the silver screen. But he set one condition. He could only work in Glendale for 1 week. His home was in New York, with his family and his stand-up shows. Spielberg and Katzenberg explained the importance of face-to-face meetings. Seinfeld understood, but he stressed that he wasn't going to change his lifestyle. Besides, working on a film like this takes years and would mean moving to California. To add some humor to a tense moment, he joked that he would just send photos via email as a form of feedback. That disagreement could have ended B-Movie before it even started. It might have even tarnished Seinfeld's reputation in Hollywood, ensuring no one would ever call him again. Then Katzenberg suggested an idea: virtual meetings. Today, this sounds like second nature, but in 2003, it was anything but common. Seinfeld was interested, but asked how they would pull it off. A few days later, DreamWorks animation technicians installed a high-end teleconferencing system, HP Halo, in his Manhattan office. It featured giant screens, integrated cameras, and a direct connection to Los Angeles. It was a total technological revolution. This allowed him to work on the project every day for 8 hours. It was the first time such a novel and expensive procedure had ever been used. florist. At first, Seinfeld didn't understand how it worked. He felt lost. He even regretted ever making that joke about bees. Before he could walk away from it all, Spielberg and Katzenberg explained the mechanics to him. He learned quickly and realized what was happening. DreamWorks hadn't asked him to adapt to them. They were adapting to him. Now there were no more excuses. B-Movie had to become a film. DreamWorks set a budget of $150 million and a release date, November 2nd, 2007. But if you thought the problems were solved, you thought wrong. Thanks to telecommunications, the producer could turn B-Movie into a major Hollywood animated production. But first, they needed the essentials. A script. Seinfeld had the basic premise. A bee ends up taking on humanity. However, he didn't want to write the movie alone. He was used to working in a team. Spielberg and Katzenberg suggested several experienced Hollywood screenwriters, but they knew the comedian had the final word and he wouldn't budge. He felt that typical industry professionals would turn it into a generic product. If the film was going to bear his signature, he needed people he trusted. He called Spike Feresten and Andy Robin, two key writers from Seinfeld. He also added Barry Marder, a comedian, and his regular opening act for stand-up shows. And that's how he formed a creative core that was very much his own. First, they decided the story would take place in New York, which they considered the capital of comedy. Then they started writing, and soon realized something wasn't working. An animated film wasn't a sitcom or a stand-up monologue. The pacing, structure, and emotional arc required a different logic. Seinfeld began to grow restless, until Katzenberg stepped in. He told him he would be there the entire time to guide him through whatever he needed. The comedian explained his situation, so the executive provided a crash course on how an animated feature is built. Even though he was in control, Seinfeld understood he was on new ground. He listened, learned, and figured out how to apply those lessons to the story he wanted to tell. Now better oriented, Seinfeld and his writers worked with more confidence. Feresten, Robin, and Marder proposed ideas and dialogue, which were then discussed and rewritten. Along with their usual humor, they incorporated facts they researched about bees. After several months, they had a draft ready that they would continue to polish for years. B-Movie centers on Barry B. Benson, a bee who is just starting his working life outside the hive. He soon meets Vanessa, a florist who saves his life, and discovers that humans consume the honey that bees produce. This leads him to an unprecedented decision. He sues humanity, including celebrities who endorse honey brands. He wins, but triggers a global ecological imbalance. Now, Barry must find a way to prevent the destruction of the world. Seinfeld sent the draft of B-Movie to Spielberg and Katzenberg. They loved the story and the characters, though they admitted it was eccentric. It didn't look like any previous DreamWorks film or any other studio production in Hollywood. Still, they recognized the comedian's signature style and believed that would make it unique. Before polishing the script further, the producers felt it was essential to hire a directing duo. They had two names in mind, Simon J. Smith and Steve Hickner. Both had been with DreamWorks Animation since its inception, but Hickner was the only one who had co-directed a film before, The Prince of Egypt. Once again, the final decision rested with Seinfeld. He met with Smith and Hickner, and as soon as they began to talk, it turned out both were huge fans of his. They loved the draft and were eager to bring to life a project that was closer in tone to Seinfeld than to a classic animated film. By the time Seinfeld realized it, it was 2005. He thought his work on B-Movie was nearly finished. He figured he'd record Barry's voice and stop connecting with Glendale. That's when Katzenberg said the magic words, "You can participate in the production as much as you want." The comedian didn't know how to respond. It was clear that no one at DreamWorks was saying no to him. He replied, "Well, a little." But that little turned into a lot. Far too much. And this brought more than a few complications. With the script ready and the directors chosen, the production of B-Movie began selecting the voices, and once again, Seinfeld had the final word. Seinfeld would bring the protagonist to life, but the cast needed to be extensive. There were bees, humans, and celebrities playing themselves. The comedian approved high-profile names, Kathy Bates, Chris Rock, Matthew Broderick, and John Goodman. He also personally called Oprah Winfrey for the role of the judge and Larry King to play an animated version of himself. He then helped convince Sting and Ray Liotta, the latter specifically because he was the type of actor no one would ever imagine in an animated comedy. Many accepted immediately, but not because it was a DreamWorks Animation film. It was because it was Seinfeld's first cinematic project. However, the comedian's true obsession was Renée Zellweger. Only she could be the voice of Vanessa. He asked the production to contact her agents, but no one responded. He knew she was a busy star, but he had no plan B. This required the comedian to go to lengths no one expected. Since she also lived in Manhattan, he began to follow her to places she frequented, especially premieres. He would sit near her and then pretend pretend to bump into her by chance. That was how he told her about B-Movie. He spoke to her about Vanessa and how important her relationship with Barry was to the plot. He persisted patiently until she finally agreed. With the cast signed, it was time to record the voices. Seinfeld discovered the standard procedure. Each actor records their part alone in a booth, and he wasn't convinced. He told Spielberg and Katzenberg that it would be better to record the scenes with the actors together. He was looking for rhythm, spontaneity, and genuine chemistry. The producers stared at him for a moment and, for the first time, said no. They explained that recording a performer in isolation allowed for maximum control during the sound mix. But Seinfeld didn't back down. He argued that comedy requires reaction, that timing is born from exchange, and that this would be the key to B-Movie's success. Katzenberg insisted they didn't usually work that way. There were protocols they intended to respect. Sensing an imminent conflict, Spielberg suggested they could do a test. With that green light, Seinfeld recorded a scene with Zellweger. They began reciting their lines according to the directions of Smith and Hickner. In fact, the recording was supervised by them, Spielberg, and Katzenberg. For the next take, the comedian improvised and she kept up with his pace. The directors and producers were fascinated. They experienced the same thing when Seinfeld recorded his parts with the rest of the cast. Everyone used their own microphones so that the audio remained clean. Keep in mind that in these films, it is essential for the dialogue to be clear so that animators can synchronize it with the characters. At DreamWorks, no one doubted that Seinfeld wasn't just Barry. He was the creative center of the project, and if he wanted to change something, it was changed. The next stage would be animation, and that's where this level of control would have even greater consequences. Making an animated film is complex enough, but in B-Movie, there was an extra factor. Seinfeld was omnipresent, like a god. Before animation even began, he reviewed every single storyboard one by one. He also worked closely with the production designer to approve the look of both the B world and the human world. The latter had to feel like the Upper West Side of Manhattan, the very place where he lived. The movie had to breathe New York. He then spoke constantly with Smith and Hickner, who assembled a team of 40 animators. All of them worked in the DreamWorks studios in Glendale and Redwood City. The comedian followed every bit of progress from New York, thanks to the teleconferencing system. The studio had adapted to him, and now the production had too. By the time animation started, Seinfeld knew exactly how the directors would work. Although they had researched bees for the writing phase, they would use traditional 3D digital animation. No real bees on set, and no motion capture. Everything would be done by hand using keyframes. Real bees were only used as a reference. Barry wasn't supposed to move like an insect. He was supposed to move in the style of Seinfeld himself, like a neurotic human doing stand-up. That meant more gestures, more facial expressiveness, and more comic timing. The animation had to adjust to his voice, not the other way around. In those early days of production, Seinfeld was fascinated. He learned technical terms, familiarized himself with the animation process, and spent hours connected with the directors reviewing scenes. He was dazzled by how his ideas came to life through CGI, an acronym he also had to learn. But he remembered Katzenberg's phrase, "You can participate in the production as much as you want." So he decided he would keep intervening to correct whatever was necessary. One day, Seinfeld saw a scene where Barry interacts with his parents. Smith and Hickner were satisfied, but he wasn't. He said it lacked movement, rhythm, and life. He proposed rewriting lines to improve the pauses and punchlines. Katzenberg had already warned him that animation is slow and expensive. Changing a single phrase could mean redoing entire shots. Even so, he didn't care. He had always been a perfectionist, and now he wasn't just part of a movie. He had become the soul of B-Movie. His name was on the line more than ever, so he had to push himself and everyone else. This correction from Seinfeld didn't bother Smith or Hickner at first. However, the comedian began asking for changes every single day, for almost every scene. He personally committed to rewriting parts to make them work better with the animation and the cadence. Now concerned, the filmmakers spoke with Spielberg and Katzenberg. They admitted that the production of B-Movie had become atypical. In fact, it looked nothing like any other DreamWorks animated film. They discussed the comedian at length, but Spielberg came to a conclusion. It was Jerry Seinfeld. He was the father of the story, and he had been promised the role of the author of a film that was already in full swing. Still, Spielberg wanted to see the new pages he was handing in, and he saw that they were excellent. Soon, Seinfeld's feedback sessions became a routine, until he asked for something more drastic, to stop everything. He noticed that the tone of B-Movie was unstable. The story was a mix of romantic comedy, workplace satire, a legal trial, and an ecological fable. Sometimes it worked, but sometimes it didn't. Because of this, he set out to heavily overhaul the script, and the team finally hit their breaking point. Spielberg and Katzenberg held a secret meeting with Smith and Hickner. It was clear they had to balance two forces, Seinfeld's creativity and the stability of a team that needed certainty. Spielberg still trusted the comedian, though he admitted it was difficult to reel him in. He knew that his tweaks could mean cost overruns and stretching deadlines. They might not make the November 2007 premiere, and if he tried to set limits, the project itself itself could be in danger. No one wanted B-movie to be canceled and lose so many millions. So Spielberg and Katzenberg understood they had to yield, and they committed to taking responsibility for whatever happened. It was part of the implicit deal. If Seinfeld saw something he didn't like, it was revised. But Smith and Hickner were also thinking about the crew. They knew the animators needed security. Changing direction mid-process could be detrimental to the film and to everyone's confidence. One only had to look at their faces to see they were fed up with Seinfeld. The producers assured them that everything was going well and finally asked if they wanted to comment. Then one of the animators said he felt very tired, but he was loving making B-movie. He considered it a different kind of film because it had the magic of his idol, Jerry Seinfeld. His colleagues agreed. Smith and Hickner breathed a sigh of relief, but the possibility of a collapse remained. For his part, Seinfeld continued to be demanding with every scene. He paid special attention to those involving Barry and Vanessa. He told everyone that this was the heart of the story. At first, they are friends, but they quickly engage in adult conversations with a dynamic typical of romantic comedies. They develop a relationship that isn't exactly friendship, but isn't something more either. He wanted fast-paced dialogue with ambiguity, far removed from the typical children's movie. By mid-2005, the routine on B-movie was clear: review, adjust, rewrite, and reanimate. Production moved forward, but always under the same logic. This wasn't just a DreamWorks Animation production, it was Seinfeld's personal project. Everyone was satisfied with this setup until the accusation surfaced. If there is one nightmare scenario for an animated blockbuster, it's being accused of stealing an idea. One morning in June 2005, Seinfeld turned on his telecommunication system. He was ready for another long session with DreamWorks, but something was different. The directors looked uneasy. The comedian asked if he had pushed too hard with his demands. Soon, Spielberg and Katzenberg appeared to deliver unexpected news. B-movie was being accused of plagiarism. Shocked, Seinfeld read the full report that had just broken across global media. Two young Swedish filmmakers, Henrik Wahlgren and Per Umerus, claimed they had traveled to Los Angeles in 2002. They had been summoned to a meeting with the head of scripts at DreamWorks. According to them, Wahlgren and Umerus presented a pilot and a script for a project titled Babylon. It was an animated film about bees and their contact with humans. They heard nothing for weeks, so they decided to call for an update. They were told that Babylon was considered a good idea, but too childish for the North American market. They took the rejection well, until they heard about the production of B-movie. Deep down, Seinfeld felt as restless as everyone else at DreamWorks. He had never been accused of anything like this before, and he admitted the concepts were similar. This could have brought him and the entire project down. Still, he kept his cool. For starters, neither Spielberg nor Katzenberg had ever mentioned Babylon to him. Everything had started with that joke at dinner. He tried to project calm to the team, but the directors noted that Wahlgren and Umerus were planning to wait until the premiere to consider legal action. The comedian suggested they keep working exactly as they had been, staying true to themselves. He added that the release was still a long way off. Spielberg and Katzenberg agreed he was right, but one of the directors wanted to know what would happen if they were actually taken to court. Seinfeld said he would be the first to testify. He would fight just like Barry did in the trial against humanity, and the producers assured him they would fight too. With their nerves settled, Seinfeld and the B-movie team finished the film. Then came post-production, which the comedian also supervised. Although one issue had been weighing on him: how would they sell an animated movie so different from any other? To promote a movie as strange as B-movie, they needed a campaign just as bizarre. Seinfeld was certain he wouldn't be just another actor in the promotion. When he met with the DreamWorks marketing team, deals with McDonald's were already in place, and press plans and trailers were underway. But everyone agreed on one thing: the campaign had to center on him. Initially, he wasn't so sure, but he thought it through. They had a movie that didn't look like it came from any known studio. It didn't feel like DreamWorks. It didn't feel like Pixar. It didn't feel like anything else. It felt personal, so it needed a clear face. And if no one could say no to him during production, they wouldn't start now during the campaign. The first marketing move took place in May 2007 during the Cannes Film Festival. Seinfeld participated in a meeting with the international press where several exclusive clips were shown, some with unfinished footage. His humorous commentary brought every second to life, but that was nothing. The following day, the comedian appeared on the Croisette dressed in a bee suit. They had installed a harness system connecting the beach to the Carlton Hotel. The idea was simple and absurd: fly over the boardwalk dressed as Barry. For a moment he hesitated, but the event bore his signature. He soared through the air before journalists and curious onlookers. He swung more than expected and thought he might end up on a car, but he reached the other side to a round of applause. Seinfeld was glad to be alive, but he decided he wouldn't wear that suit ever again. That stance vanished the moment Spielberg called to tell him it had been a sensation and they needed to repeat it. In fact, Spielberg thought the trailers shouldn't just consist of movie clips. Seinfeld himself should appear acting as a bee, with a clear narrative thread, playing with meta humor. The comedian admitted it was a brilliant idea, but he agreed to no more B-robatics. In the following months, Seinfeld appeared as Barry in trailers and TV spots. The first shows him trying to shoot the movie in live action, inside a studio, alongside other actors in costumes. The second teaser features the comedian trying to pollinate a flower. When it goes wrong, Spielberg himself recommends using animation. That serves as the jumping-off point for more trailers composed of sequences from the film. That marketing campaign was a success and broke the mold. Remember, this was 2007, and social media didn't dominate our lives yet, but there was a massive buzz in internet forums and websites. In addition to the comedy, they used the slogan, "Give bees a chance." This would later cause legal trouble, but at the time it reinforced the idea that B-movie was something different. Seinfeld was happy with the media coverage, but he started to have doubts. He knew the movie was atypical. It didn't fit into a clear category, and he knew that could be either a blessing or a curse. Seinfeld's theory was confirmed when he read the first reviews. Some recognized his humor, while others argued it was a restrained version of that specific comedy style. Some praised the animation, while others considered it far too routine. However, everyone agreed on one thing: the story was incredibly strange. Still, Seinfeld, Spielberg, Katzenberg, and everyone responsible for B-movie hoped it would be a commercial hit. The start was solid, with good numbers in the opening days, but the weekend closed in second place, with $39 million. The comedian visited theaters in New York to listen to the audience. Many said they had fun, but they also noted it was just too weird. Amidst this somber outlook, B-movie ended up grossing $293 million worldwide. It hadn't been a hit, though it wasn't a failure either. The public didn't quite know what to make of it. It didn't feel like a studio movie. It felt like a comedian's personal experiment with an unlimited budget. This situation angered Seinfeld. He even thought he would rather be hated than simply ignored. He spoke with Spielberg and Katzenberg, who explained that this was a common situation, but that didn't calm him down. He then tried to look on the bright side. The directors of Babylon never followed through on their threat to take them to court. He had no idea that other problems were already knocking at the door. While reflecting on the bittersweet taste the experience had left him, Seinfeld wanted to get back to his routine of doing stand-up shows. But before he could draft a single line for his scripts, Katzenberg asked to speak via the telecommunicator. The comedian obliged, assuming he'd hear unpleasant updates regarding Babylon. He was already bracing for a trial. Instead, the head of DreamWorks Animation showed him some clips, but Seinfeld looked away, disgusted. It was something similar to B-movie, but with lower quality, no wit, and far too ordinary. Katzenberg then told him it was Abelhinhas, or Little B, a Brazilian production that had been released shortly before their project. It had been cooked up by Video Brinquedo, a company notorious for producing cheap mockbusters of Hollywood films. Seinfeld said he was ready to take legal action against Video Brinquedo, but Katzenberg told him it wasn't worth the effort. For one thing, it hadn't affected B-movie in any way. For another, he had taken the time to watch Abelhinhas and confirmed the plot was different. In that version, the bees simply have to protect their hive. The comedian agreed. He even found a silver lining. If the movie they made inspired copies, it meant people were paying attention. At the very least, they had been a huge hit among the opportunists. Were the troubles for B-movie finally over? Not at all. A few days later, Seinfeld was finally preparing his new shows when a newspaper article left him perplexed. DreamWorks Animation had been sued by a cosmetics company. He called Spielberg and Katzenberg, who brought him up to speed. The company in question was B-Ceuticals LLC, which specialized in skincare products. Belonged to Richie Gerber, cousin of radio host Howard Stern, and he claimed that the filmmakers had used a slogan that belonged to him: "Give bees a chance." According to the lawsuit, Gerber had filed a trademark application for the slogan in October 2006. They also noted that the slogan had been used over 400 times on Stern's show. And that wasn't all. The suit claimed that in April and May 2007, B-Ceuticals met with DreamWorks to present a marketing plan featuring that slogan and other copyrighted works. Seinfeld said he had never been aware of that part of the promotion. He didn't accuse Spielberg or Katzenberg. Instead, he blamed himself for not getting even more involved. Spielberg calmed the waters and said he would handle the resolution. The comedian stayed alert but heard no more news until January 2008. After much back and forth, DreamWorks and B-Ceuticals reached an out-of-court settlement. The phrase "give bees a chance" had to be pulled from the movie's promotion. The legal problems for the B-movie team had ended, but nothing improved the box office numbers or boosted its cultural impact. It seemed it would soon fade into oblivion, but fate had surprises in store, both positive and negative. The resurrection of a film can mean a second chance for its creators, but how is it viewed by today's world? A few years after the premiere of B-Movie, Seinfeld and everyone involved moved on with their lives. The comedian maintained his status as a comedy giant with live shows and streaming specials. Spielberg and Katzenberg continued their trajectories filled with success and respect. Smith and Hickner worked on other DreamWorks productions, but had very few opportunities to direct feature films again. By 2012, B-Movie seemed like a distant memory for Seinfeld, until a friend sent him a link. Upon clicking, he accessed a page for the movie on the site TV Tropes. It contained more images, data, and analysis than any media outlet at the time of the release. He started paying more attention to the web, and a year later, he was told it had gained massive popularity on Reddit. Someone had created a subreddit for the film where users could discuss the movie and, above all, share memes and GIFs. This trend repeated on Tumblr, and on an invention that barely existed when the movie premiered: modern social media. The comedian couldn't believe how B-Movie had found its audience among millennials and Gen Z, who were more open to the humor and tone they had experimented with years prior. He mentioned it to Spielberg, Katzenberg, the writers, and the directors, never imagining that the phenomenon was only just beginning. In the years that followed, Seinfeld's amazement grew. In 2015, he discovered people on Facebook and other platforms pasting the entire script or large fragments of it as copy pasta. The following year, a YouTube user named Avoid at All Costs uploaded a video titled B-Movie, but it keeps getting faster. In this version, the movie speeds up every time the word B is spoken, resulting in a total runtime of just 7 minutes. As absurd as it sounds, it racked up over 12 million views. This paved the way for other similar videos like slow-motion versions or edits with other bizarre elements. Debates also surfaced regarding the relationship between Barry and Vanessa, but it's better not to get into that just yet. I'll tell you why at the end of the video. Suddenly, B-Movie hadn't just been resurrected. It had achieved a level of fame that neither Seinfeld nor anyone else involved ever thought possible. Even Vanity Fair published an article about the phenomenon. Hollywood took notice too. The film cycled through various streaming platforms, where it consistently topped the most-watched charts. At the same time, a new generation of critics elevated it as a funny, intelligent, and bold animated production in an era where true originality is a rare commodity. Seinfeld found the cultural impact of B-Movie surreal, though he learned to enjoy it, a sentiment shared by Spielberg, Katzenberg, and everyone at DreamWorks Animation. This story could end here with a happy finale, but there is a somewhat awkward bonus track. In 2021, Seinfeld decided to sit down and watch B-Movie in its entirety for the first time in many years. He confirmed that he had authored an entertaining and peculiar film until he reached the scenes between Barry and Vanessa. He was still happy with the choice of Zellweger. She wasn't the problem. He had written those dialogues to be funny and adult, but he realized some lines were a bit too suggestive. The B seemed to want a much closer type of relationship with the woman, which struck him as inappropriate for a family movie. He recognized it was his fault and realized the extent to which no one had dared to stop him during production. Because of this, he took the opportunity during an interview on The Tonight Show, starring Jimmy Fallon, to issue a public apology.
And I apologize for what seems to be a certain uncomfortable, subtle sexual aspect of the B-Movie.
Even so, nothing has eclipsed the massive cult following the film continues to generate. B-Movie was exactly what its creators promised that night, a film with the author's voice left intact. And when a single voice makes every decision, the result is never neutral. It baffled audiences, divided critics, and drifted into limbo. But time and digital culture gave it a second life. In doing so, it proves that, unlike B's, movies are eternal. Making The Devil Wears Prada in its sequel was an absolute nightmare for one clear reason. Meryl Streep's character is based on a real person.